Ethan Parker never expected that a simple act of kindness would change not only his life, but potentially the relationship between two species across the galaxy. It started on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday afternoon in the rural outskirts of Millfield, where the 12-year-old boy was exploring the creek that cut through the wooded area behind his family's farmhouse. The late summer air hung heavy with humidity as Ethan navigated the familiar path alongside the burbling creek. He carried his explorer's backpack, packed with essentials, a magnifying glass, specimen jars, a worn field guide to local wildlife, and the peanut butter sandwich his mom had insisted he take. His parents encouraged his outdoor adventures, especially since they'd moved from the city 3 years ago. Better than being glued to screens all day, his dad always said. Ethan had just rounded a bend in the creek when he heard it, a strange, high-pitched whine unlike anything he'd encountered before. It wasn't a bird or any mammal he recognized. The sound came again, weaker this time, from a tangle of fallen branches near the water's edge. Cautiously, Ethan approached, parting the branches with a stick. His eyes widened at the sight before him. Trapped in the debris and partially submerged in the shallow water lay a creature unlike anything he had ever seen. At first glance, it appeared to be a lizard, but no lizard Ethan knew had iridescent scales that shifted colors in the dappled sunlight, from deep emerald to azure and back again. It was no bigger than a house cat, with delicate wings folded against its sides, twitching feebly. Its head was crested with tiny spines that glowed faintly, and its eyes, large, intelligent, and currently filled with pain and fear, locked onto Ethan's. A dragon, Ethan whispered in disbelief. He had read enough fantasy novels to recognize what he was seeing, even if his rational mind struggled to accept it. But this wasn't the massive, fire-breathing monster of legends. This was a baby, clearly injured and frightened. The creature attempted to move away as Ethan drew closer, but its movements were hampered by what appeared to be an injury to one of its wings and its right hind leg. It emitted that strange whining sound again, and Ethan could swear it was calling for help. "Hey, it's okay," Ethan said softly, crouching down. "I'm not going to hurt you." The dragon hissed weakly, a tiny puff of steam escaping its nostrils. Its scales rippled with color, settling into a defensive red-orange. "You're hurt," Ethan continued, keeping his voice low and gentle. "Let me help you." With slow, deliberate movements, Ethan removed his backpack and took out a small towel he kept for collecting specimens. The dragon watched warily as Ethan dipped the towel in the creek water and wrung it out. "This might sting a little, but I need to clean your wounds," he explained, not sure if the creature could understand him, but feeling it was important to communicate his intentions anyway. To his surprise, the dragon remained still as Ethan carefully cleaned the mud and debris from its injured wing. The membrane was torn in places, and Ethan winced in sympathy. The leg didn't appear broken, but there was a nasty gash along the thigh that was seeping a strange, silvery fluid that Ethan assumed was blood. After cleaning the wounds as best he could, Ethan faced a dilemma. He couldn't leave the creature here, injured and vulnerable. But bringing home an alien dragon wasn't exactly something he could explain to his parents. The dragon made the decision for him. As Ethan hesitated, it dragged itself toward him, leaving a small trail of silver in the mud. It looked up at him with those strange, intelligent eyes and made a chirping sound that tugged at something deep in Ethan's chest. Okay, I'll take you home and fix you up. But you have to stay hidden, understand? My parents would freak out." Ethan gently wrapped the dragon in his towel, being careful of its injuries. The creature was surprisingly warm to the touch, like holding a living hot water bottle. It didn't struggle as Ethan placed it in his backpack, leaving the top unzipped for air. The walk home seemed to take forever. Ethan's mind raced with questions. Where had the dragon come from? Were there more? How had it ended up injured in the creek? But most pressingly, how was he going to hide a mythological creature in his bedroom? By the time Ethan reached his family's farmhouse, he had formulated a plan. His parents were both at work, Mom at the veterinary clinic in town, Dad at his engineering job 30 miles away. He had about 3 hours before anyone came home. Ethan slipped into the house through the back door and headed straight for the garage. His dad's workshop would have the supplies he needed. He gently placed his backpack on the workbench and unzipped it fully. The dragon poked its head out, nostrils flaring as it took in the new surroundings. Its colors had shifted to a curious blend of blues and purples. "Wait here," Ethan said. "I'll be right back." He gathered supplies. His mom's first aid kit, some balsa wood and thin fabric from his dad's model airplane supplies that might work as a splint for the wing, and a shallow plastic container that could serve as a temporary habitat. From the kitchen, he grabbed a bowl of water and, after some consideration, a selection of potential foods: raw chicken from the fridge, some berries, nuts, and even a few pieces of his dog's kibble. He had no idea what a baby dragon might eat. When he returned to the garage, Ethan found the dragon had crawled out of his backpack and was investigating a shelf of paint cans, its tail swishing with curiosity. It turned at his approach, and Ethan could have sworn it looked guilty, like a child caught doing something it shouldn't. "Let's get you fixed up," Ethan said, setting down his supplies. Treating the dragon proved easier than expected. It seemed to understand Ethan was trying to help and remained surprisingly cooperative as he cleaned the wounds with antiseptic, which made it hiss and release another puff of steam, but didn't pull away. The wing was the most challenging. Ethan fashioned a splint using the balsa wood and secured it with gauze, creating a support that would keep the membrane extended until it healed. "There you go," Ethan said when he was finished. "That should help." The dragon inspected Ethan's handiwork, turning its head at an impossible angle to examine the splinted wing. Then it looked at Ethan and made a purring sound that vibrated the air between them. Next came the food experiment. Ethan arranged the different options in small piles and watched as the dragon sniffed each offering. It rejected the dog kibble outright with a disgusted sneeze that produced sparks. The berries received cautious licks before being deemed acceptable. The nuts were ignored. But the raw chicken, that produced an immediate reaction. The dragon's crest stood up straight, glowing brightly, and it devoured the meat with surprising speed for such a small creature. "Carnivore, got it," Ethan noted, making mental calculations about how much chicken he could smuggle from the fridge without his mom noticing. With the dragon fed and its wounds treated, Ethan prepared the plastic container with an old towel as bedding. He placed it in his bedroom closet, figuring that would be the safest place to hide his new friend. "This is just temporary," he told the dragon as he settled it into the makeshift nest. "Until you're healed up." The dragon curled up in the container, its colors shifting to a content-looking turquoise as it rested its head on its uninjured foreleg. Its eyes, however, remained fixed on Ethan with an intensity that made him slightly uncomfortable, as if it was memorizing every detail of his face. "I should probably give you a name," Ethan mused. "How about Ember?" The dragon blinked slowly, and Ethan decided to take that as approval. "Okay, Ember it is. I've got homework to do, but I'll check on you later." As Ethan closed the closet door, leaving it cracked for air, he couldn't help but feel he had just stepped into one of the fantasy novels he loved to read. Except this was real. There was an actual dragon in his closet. Part of him wanted to tell someone, to prove he wasn't imagining things, but a stronger instinct told him to keep Ember a secret, at least until he understood more about where the creature had come from. That night, after a dinner during which Ethan was unusually quiet, prompting his mother to feel his forehead for signs of fever, he snuck more chicken up to his room for Ember. The dragon was awake and alert, its colors bright, and its movements more energetic than before. The silvery blood had stopped seeping from its leg wound, and while the wing still looked damaged, Ember was able to extend it slightly within the constraints of the splint. "You're looking better," Ethan whispered, offering the chicken. Ember took the food delicately from his fingers, its scales briefly brushing against Ethan's skin with surprising softness. After eating, the dragon climbed out of the container and up onto Ethan's arm, its claws providing just enough pressure to maintain balance without breaking skin. "Hey," Ethan protested softly, but without real alarm. There was something strangely comforting about the weight of the small creature on his shoulder. Ember nuzzled against Ethan's neck, that strange purring vibration stronger now. Then, to Ethan's astonishment, he felt a gentle pressure in his mind, like the softest of knocks on a door. Ethan froze, heart racing. Was he imagining things? The pressure came again, more insistent this time, accompanied by a series of images that flashed through his mind. The creek, the fallen branches, the pain of injury, the relief when Ethan appeared. Emotions followed the images: fear, gratitude, trust. Are you in my head?" Ethan whispered. The pressure changed, became a warm sense of acknowledgement. Ember was communicating with him, not with words, but with impressions and emotions. That's amazing, Ethan breathed, reaching up to gently stroke the dragon's head. Ember leaned into the touch, projecting contentment. More images came. Ember flying through strange skies, part of a group of similar creatures of various sizes and colors. Then darkness, confusion, the sensation of falling, impact with water and branches. Being lost and alone in a strange place. "You're not from Earth, are you?" Ethan asked, though he already knew the answer. "How did you get here?" The response was a confused jumble, as if Ember either didn't know or couldn't explain in a way Ethan could understand. What came through clearly, however, was a sense of separation. Ember had been taken from its family somehow and ended up here, injured and alone. "Don't worry," Ethan promised. "I'll help you get better, and then we'll figure out how to get you home." Ember projected gratitude again, stronger this time, along with a deepening sense of trust that made Ethan's chest feel warm. The dragon settled more comfortably on his shoulder, and Ethan felt a strange bond forming between them, something he couldn't explain but knew was significant. That night, Ember slept curled up on Ethan's pillow, its warmth and gentle purring lulling the boy into dreams filled with flying through alien skies alongside creatures of light and color. Ethan woke to the sound of his alarm and the sensation of something warm pressed against his neck. For a moment, he thought his cat Milo had snuck into his room, but then the events of the previous day came rushing back. He turned his head carefully to find Ember still fast asleep, its colors muted to a peaceful pale blue. "Ember," he whispered, "wake up. I have to get ready for school." The dragon stirred, opening one eye lazily. A feeling of contentment washed over Ethan, followed by reluctance when Ember sensed Ethan needed to move. "I'll be back this afternoon," Ethan promised as he gently transferred the drowsy dragon back to its container in the closet. "Stay hidden, okay? It's important." Ember projected understanding, settling back into the makeshift nest. Ethan left more chicken and water, then hesitated, suddenly anxious about leaving the creature alone all day. What if his mom decided to clean his room? What if Ember got bored and went exploring? As if sensing his concerns, Ember sent a reassuring impression, an image of itself sleeping peacefully in the container, waiting for Ethan's return. "Okay, I'm trusting you," Ethan said. "See you later." School that day was a blur. Ethan went through the motions of classes and conversations, but his mind kept returning to the dragon in his closet. During lunch, he researched dragons on his phone, but the information was all fantasy and mythology, nothing that could help him understand what Ember really was or where it had come from. By the time the final bell rang, Ethan was practically vibrating with impatience. He raced home, ignoring friends who called after him, and burst through the front door, almost colliding with his mother. "Whoa there," she laughed, steadying him. "What's the rush?" "Just homework," Ethan panted, trying to look normal and failing spectacularly. His mother raised an eyebrow. "Since when are you excited about homework?" "Big science project," he improvised. "About, reptiles." "Well, you're in luck," she said. "I brought home some reference books from the clinic that might help. They're on the kitchen table." Ethan thanked her and hurried upstairs, relieved to find his bedroom door still closed as he'd left it. He slipped inside and locked the door behind him, then crossed to the closet with nervous anticipation. "Ember," he called softly, opening the door. The container was empty. Panic seized Ethan as he searched the closet, then his entire room, looking under the bed, in drawers, behind furniture. There was no sign of the dragon. Had it somehow escaped the house? Was it lost again, vulnerable and injured? Just as Ethan was about to expand his search to the rest of the house, risking questions from his mother, he noticed the curtain by his window moving slightly. There, perched on the windowsill and perfectly camouflaged against the blue curtain fabric, was Ember, watching the yard outside with intense interest. "There you are." Ethan exhaled in relief. "You scared me." Ember turned, its colors shifting to match Ethan's blue jeans and red t-shirt. The dragon projected an apology mixed with excitement, directing Ethan's attention to the window. Ethan joined Ember at the windowsill and looked out at the backyard. At first, he saw nothing unusual, just the familiar view of their property stretching toward the distant tree line. Then he noticed a flicker of movement near the old oak tree at the edge of the yard. Something was circling the tree, something that glinted in the afternoon sunlight with flashes of color. Ethan squinted, trying to make out details at this distance. "Is that?" he began. Ember's excitement peaked, and the mental connection between them flooded with recognition and joy. More images filled Ethan's mind. The group of dragons Ember had shown him before, flying together, communicating, a family, or perhaps a pod. "Your people found you," Ethan realized, a complex mix of emotions washing over him. He was happy for Ember, but also suddenly sad at the thought of saying goodbye so soon. Ember projected understanding of Ethan's mixed feelings, along with gratitude, and something deeper, something that felt like a promise. Then the dragon moved, extending its injured wing carefully. The splint Ethan had made was still in place, but the membrane looked better already, the tears visibly smaller than they had been the day before. "You heal fast," Ethan observed, impressed. "But you're not fully better yet. You shouldn't try to fly." Ember acknowledged this, but continued to watch the movement outside with longing. Ethan made a decision. "I'll take you outside to see them, but we have to be careful. My mom's home." Sneaking past his mother proved easier than expected. She was engrossed in a phone call in her home office. Ethan slipped out the back door with Ember concealed in his jacket, the dragon's excitement a tangible presence in his mind. As they approached the tree line, Ethan began to make out more details of the creature circling the oak. It was indeed another dragon, larger than Ember, with scales that shimmered between deep purple and midnight blue. It spotted them and swooped lower, hovering with powerful beats of its wings that stirred the grass beneath it. Ember wriggled free from Ethan's jacket and climbed to his shoulder, projecting a complex series of emotions and images toward the larger dragon. The adult, Ethan assumed it was an adult, landed gracefully on a low branch of the oak tree and studied Ethan with eyes that seemed to glow from within. Ethan felt a new presence brush against his mind, stronger and more focused than Ember's. It carried with it a sense of age and wisdom that made Ethan think of ancient redwood trees and deep ocean trenches. "Hello," Ethan said aloud, feeling slightly foolish but unsure how else to respond. The adult dragon's head tilted, its crest rising slightly. Then came images and impressions. Ember injured and alone, a violent storm, a tear in the sky, separation and loss. The adult was explaining how Ember had become stranded here, some kind of accident during what Ethan interpreted as migration or travel. Next came questions, directed not at Ember, but at Ethan himself. How had he found Ember? Why had he helped? There was caution in these questions, but also genuine curiosity. "I found Ember by the creek," Ethan explained, hoping the dragon could understand him as well as he seemed to understand it. "He was hurt. I couldn't just leave him there." Ember corrected him with a gentle impression. Not he, but something else, a concept Ethan couldn't quite grasp that seemed related to gender but was more fluid, tied to the shifting colors of the dragon's scales. "Sorry," Ethan amended. "I couldn't leave Ember there." The adult dragon considered this, its gaze intensifying. Ethan had the uncomfortable feeling he was being scanned somehow, his intentions and character evaluated. Then the pressure in his mind eased, replaced by warmth and what felt distinctly like approval. A new set of images formed, more dragons, many more, waiting nearby. They had been searching for Ember since the accident, tracing the lost youngster across space to this unlikely planet. They had found Ember through the mental connection all their kind shared, but they had been cautious about approaching, unsure of the inhabitants of this world and their intentions. "They're not going to hurt you," Ethan promised. At least, most people wouldn't. As he said it, though, Ethan realized he couldn't guarantee that. Humans had a long history of reacting poorly to things they didn't understand. The adult dragon seemed to follow his thoughts, projecting agreement and concern. Then came a request, formed as a series of impressions. Ember needed more time to heal before attempting the journey home. The dragons needed a safe place to wait. They had sensed Ethan's kindness through Ember's connection with him and wondered if he would help them too. Ethan's mind raced. One small dragon was manageable, but many? Where would he hide them? How would he feed them all? And yet, looking at Ember perched trustingly on his shoulder, he couldn't bring himself to refuse. "How many are there?" he asked. The answer came as a numerical concept that Ethan translated as approximately 2 dozen. 2 dozen dragons. ranging from Ember's size to nearly twice as large as the adult before him. And how long do you need to stay? The response was less precise, a sense of time passing measured in healing rather than days. But from what Ethan could interpret, it would be longer than overnight and shorter than a week. Ethan looked around his family's property, considering options. The barn would be too obvious. His dad went in there daily. The old storm cellar was a possibility, but it was damp and dark. Then his eyes fell on the abandoned greenhouse at the far edge of the property, a relic from the previous owners that his parents had never gotten around to either restoring or demolishing. It was overgrown with vines on the outside, many of its glass panels cracked or missing, but it was spacious and secluded. Would that work? Ethan asked, projecting an image of the greenhouse to the dragon. The adult considered, then projected approval. It would serve as a temporary refuge while Ember healed, and they prepared for the journey home. Okay, Ethan decided. But you'll need to come after dark, when my parents are asleep. And you'll have to be quiet. The agreement was immediate, along with gratitude that flowed from both Ember and the adult. The larger dragon spread its wings, an impressive span that cast a shadow over Ethan, and launched itself back into the air with surprising grace for its size. It circled once overhead, then flew toward the distant hills, presumably to relay the plan to the others. Ember nuzzled against Ethan's cheek, projecting a complex emotion that Ethan interpreted as something between gratitude and excitement. There was sadness there too, an acknowledgement that their time together would be brief, but predominant was joy at the reunion with its kind. "I'm happy for you," Ethan said, and meant it, despite the twinge in his chest at the thought of Ember leaving. "Let's get you back inside before Mom notices we're gone." That evening, Ethan was preoccupied with preparations. He snuck out to the greenhouse during dinner, clearing space and doing his best to make it hospitable. He brought water in several large containers, unsure how much dragons needed, and emptied the freezer of every meat product he could reasonably explain away if questioned: chicken, ground beef, even fish sticks. It wouldn't be enough for 24 dragons for long, but it would have to do for tonight. After his parents went to bed, Ethan sat with Ember by the window, watching the night sky. The dragon was alert, head tilted as if listening to something Ethan couldn't hear. "Are they coming?" Ethan whispered. Ember confirmed with a gentle mental nudge. They were approaching, moving cautiously through the darkness. Ethan's heart raced with a mixture of anticipation and nerves. He was about to participate in what might be the first formal contact between humans and an intelligent alien species, even if that contact was limited to one 12-year-old boy and a group of stranded dragon-like beings. Around midnight, Ethan spotted them, faint glimmers of light descending from the sky like silent fireworks. Ember's excitement peaked, the mental connection between them vibrating with emotion. "It's time," Ethan said. "Let's go meet your family." Sneaking out of the house was nerve-wracking, but Ethan managed it by using the rarely used side door that squeaked less than the others. With Ember perched on his shoulder, he made his way across the moonlit yard toward the greenhouse. The dragons were already gathering around it, their scales glowing softly in the darkness with a rainbow of colors that shifted and changed like living auroras. They varied in size, some as small as Ember, others large enough that Ethan had to tilt his head back to look up at them as they perched on the greenhouse roof. All had the same basic form: 4 legs, 2 wings, sinuous necks and tails, crested heads with those intelligent, glowing eyes. As Ethan approached, the mental pressure he had experienced with the adult dragon earlier multiplied. Dozens of minds brushed against his, curious, cautious, grateful. The sensation was overwhelming at first, making him stumble. Ember projected something that caused the pressure to ease, becoming more manageable. "Hi," Ethan said aloud, feeling inadequate. "I'm Ethan. Welcome to Earth, I guess." The adult dragon from earlier approached, lowering its head to Ethan's level in what seemed like a gesture of respect. It projected formal gratitude, along with an introduction that Ethan couldn't possibly pronounce, but which left an impression of starlight and swift movement. Ethan led the dragons into the greenhouse, sliding open the old glass door that protested with a scrape against its rusted track. Inside, the space was filled with shadows and the scent of damp earth and old plants. Moonlight filtered through the broken panels in the roof, creating pools of silver light on the cracked concrete floor. "It's not much," Ethan apologized, suddenly aware of how primitive the shelter must seem to beings capable of interstellar travel. But the dragons projected no disappointment. Instead, Ethan felt their approval and adaptability. Several of the larger ones moved to the corners of the greenhouse, their scales shifting to deep blues and purples that seemed to absorb the darkness. The smaller ones, including Ember, explored the space with childlike curiosity, investigating the old gardening tools and empty pots with playful nudges and sniffs. "I brought some food," Ethan said, gesturing to the pile of meat he'd gathered. "I don't know if it's enough." The adult dragon, who Ethan had begun to think of as the leader, approached the food and examined it. Then it projected gratitude mixed with reassurance. The food would help, but they were capable of sustaining themselves in other ways that Ethan couldn't quite comprehend from the mental images. Something about energy and light in a process similar to but distinct from photosynthesis. Ethan watched in fascination as the dragons settled into the greenhouse. Some perched on the old shelving units that lined the walls, while others created nests on the ground using vines and leaves they carefully arranged. The leader and several other large dragons positioned themselves near the entry points, establishing a protective perimeter. Ember remained close to Ethan, projecting a mixture of joy at the reunion with its kind and continued attachment to the human boy who had saved it. Through their connection, Ethan began to understand more about these creatures. They called themselves something that translated in Ethan's mind as stellar weavers, though he sensed that was a poor approximation of a concept that encompassed their ability to navigate and manipulate cosmic energies. Their home was impossibly distant, not just another planet, but another system entirely, perhaps even another dimension. They traveled between worlds using natural phenomena that Ethan interpreted as wormholes or cosmic rifts, riding the currents of space-time like birds soaring on thermal updrafts. The accident that had separated Ember from the group had occurred during one such journey. A solar flare or similar cosmic event had disrupted their path, creating a chaotic eddy in the space-time current that had flung Ember off course. The youngling had crashed through Earth's atmosphere, sustaining injuries during the uncontrolled descent that had ultimately led to their meeting by the creek. "How will you get home?" Ethan asked, directing the question to both Ember and the leader. The response came as a series of complex images, the dragons gathering in formation, their scales shifting to uniform silver-white, their bodies generating a field of energy that would open a controlled rift in space. It was a power they could only achieve together, through the combined mental and physical energies of the group. And it required all members to be at full strength, which Ember was not. "So you need to wait until Ember is healed," Ethan said, understanding. "How long will that take?" The leader projected an approximation, 3 cycles of this world's sun. 3 days until Ember's wing and leg would be strong enough for the journey. Ethan nodded, already thinking about the logistics. 3 days of hiding 24 dragons in his backyard. 3 days of figuring out how to feed them. 3 days of keeping the biggest secret in human history. "I should get back to the house," he said reluctantly. "It's late, and my parents will check on me if they wake up, and I'm not there." The dragons understood. The leader projected assurance that they would remain hidden and quiet. Ember, however, seemed reluctant to separate from Ethan, clinging to his shoulder and projecting a sense of attachment that made Ethan's chest tight with emotion. "You should stay with your family," Ethan told Ember gently. "You'll be safer here." Ember's colors darkened to a melancholy blue-gray, but after a communication with the leader that Ethan couldn't fully interpret, the small dragon reluctantly moved from Ethan's shoulder to perch on a nearby shelf. The feeling of connection remained, a warm presence at the edge of Ethan's mind even as he backed toward the door. "I'll come back tomorrow," he promised. "After school." As Ethan made his way back to the house, he couldn't help looking over his shoulder at the greenhouse. From the outside, it appeared unchanged, the same abandoned structure it had always been. But now it contained wonders beyond imagination, visitors from another world who had entrusted their safety to a 12-year-old human boy. The weight of that responsibility settled on Ethan's shoulders as he climbed back into bed, his mind racing with plans and concerns. Eventually, exhaustion claimed him, and he drifted into dreams filled with cosmic journeys alongside creatures of light and color. Morning arrived with the harsh blare of Ethan's alarm clock. For a moment, He lay still, wondering if the events of the past 2 days had been an elaborate dream. But the lingering warmth in his mind, Ember's presence, distant but distinct, confirmed the impossible reality. Ethan went through his morning routine on autopilot, his thoughts preoccupied with the dragons. Would they remain hidden? What if someone wandered near the greenhouse? How would he explain the missing food if his mom noticed? "You're quiet this morning," his mother observed as she placed a bowl of cereal in front of him. "Everything okay at school?" Ethan startled. "Yeah, just thinking about a science project." "The reptile one you mentioned yesterday?" she asked, and Ethan nodded, relieved to have a ready excuse. "Well, don't forget those books I brought home. They might help." School that day was an exercise in patience. Ethan went through the motions, answering when called on, taking notes without registering what he was writing, counting the minutes until the final bell. During lunch, he used his phone to research the dietary needs of reptiles, the closest Earth analog he could think of to the dragons. Most were carnivores or omnivores, which aligned with what he'd observed with Ember. But the quantities he would need to feed 24 dragons, even if most of their energy came from their mysterious light absorption process, would be difficult to procure without raising questions. As the day progressed, Ethan became aware of subtle changes in the mental connection he shared with Ember. The dragon's presence in his mind grew stronger, more defined, as if their brief contact had established a pathway that was expanding with use. Occasionally, he caught glimpses of what Ember was experiencing: sunlight through broken glass, the company of other younglings, the watchful care of the adults. It was disorienting but also fascinating, like having a window into an alien mind. By the time school ended, Ethan had formulated a plan. He stopped at the local grocery store on his way home, using the emergency money his parents had given him to buy as much cheap meat as he could afford, mainly chicken thighs and ground beef on sale. He also gathered batteries, flashlights, and a few other supplies he thought might be useful. The clerk raised an eyebrow at his purchases, but didn't comment. Ethan mumbled something about a camping trip as he stuffed the items into his backpack, painfully aware of how suspicious he must look. When Ethan arrived home, he was relieved to find both his parents still at work. He stashed the meat in the garage freezer, rarely used except for summer popsicles and his dad's occasional hunting trips, before heading to check on the dragons. From the outside, the greenhouse appeared undisturbed. Ethan approached cautiously, scanning the yard for any sign of neighbors or unexpected visitors. When he was certain no one was watching, he slipped inside. The interior of the greenhouse had been transformed. The dragons had arranged the space with an efficiency and artistry that left Ethan speechless. Vines had been woven into hammock-like structures that hung from the sturdier beams. The concrete floor was now covered in a careful arrangement of plants and soil that formed comfortable nesting areas. Most striking of all, the broken glass panels in the roof had been repositioned to create a pattern that cast dappled light in specific areas, creating pools of warmth where several dragons now basked. "This is amazing," Ethan breathed. The dragons acknowledged his presence with a collective mental greeting that washed over him like a warm wave. Ember detached from a group of similarly sized dragons and glided down to land on Ethan's shoulder, projecting joy and welcome. "Your wing," Ethan exclaimed, noticing that the splint was gone and the membrane appeared fully healed. "It's better already?" Ember confirmed, extending the wing to demonstrate its recovery. The dragon's scales rippled with healthy colors, and even the injured leg seemed completely healed. The leader approached, projecting respectful greeting and gratitude. Through a series of mental images, it explained that Ember's recovery had progressed more rapidly than expected, aided by the collective healing energy of the group and the nurturing environment of Earth's atmosphere, which was richer in certain elements beneficial to their kind than they had anticipated. "Does that mean you'll be leaving sooner?" Ethan asked, surprised by the pang of sadness that accompanied the question. The leader's response was complex, a mixture of confirmation and qualification. Ember was healing well, but the group needed time to gather sufficient energy for the journey home. The process of opening a stable rift required tremendous power, which they were accumulating through their light absorption abilities. But Earth's sun, while energy-rich, provided a different spectrum than they were accustomed to. The conversion process was slower than optimal. Ethan interpreted this to mean they still needed the full 3 days, just for different reasons than originally stated. I brought more food, he offered, unsure how else to help. It's in my house. I'll bring it tonight after my parents are asleep. The leader projected gratitude but also concern, sharing images of Ethan's parents and their potential reactions if they discovered what their son was hiding. There was no fear for the dragon's safety. Ethan sensed they were confident in their ability to escape if threatened, but rather concerned for the consequences Ethan might face. It's okay, Ethan assured them. I want to help, and they won't find out. As if on cue, a distant voice called his name. His mother, home earlier than expected. I have to go, Ethan said quickly. I'll be back tonight. Ember reluctantly moved from his shoulder, projecting understanding, but also longing for more time together. Ethan stroked the dragon's head briefly before slipping out of the greenhouse and hurrying across the yard. He reached the house just as his mother was coming around the side, a look of confusion on her face. There you are, she said. What were you doing in that old greenhouse? It's not safe in there with all that broken glass. Ethan's heart hammered in his chest. I was just looking for my soccer ball, he improvised. I thought maybe it rolled in there. His mother frowned. Well, stay out of there until your father and I can get it cleaned up and repaired. Or more likely torn down, she added. It's been an eyesore since we moved in. No, Ethan exclaimed, then moderated his tone at his mother's surprised look. I mean, it could be really cool if it was fixed up. I could use it for science experiments, like growing plants and stuff. His mother studied him with the perceptive gaze that had always been able to see through his childhood fibs. Since when are you interested in gardening? Ethan shrugged, trying to appear casual. Science project, remember? About reptiles and their habitats. I thought maybe I could create a controlled environment to observe how they interact with different plants. It was a desperate stretch, but to his relief, his mother's expression softened. Well, the greenhouse would need a lot of work before it would be safe for any experiments. For now, just stay out of there, okay? Ethan nodded, crossing his fingers behind his back in a childish gesture that somehow made him feel better about the lie. That night, after checking that both his parents were soundly asleep, Ethan smuggled the meat from the garage freezer to the greenhouse. The dragons received the offering with grateful mental touches, though Ethan sensed they had less need for physical sustenance than he had initially believed. Their primary nourishment came from light and energy, with the meat serving more as a supplement than a necessity. As Ethan sat among them in the transformed greenhouse, Ember curled in his lap and several other younglings investigating him with curious mental probes, he felt a profound sense of privilege. He was witnessing something extraordinary, something that would normally be documented in history books and scientific journals. Yet it would remain his secret, a magical interlude in an otherwise ordinary life. The leader settled beside him, its larger form radiating a gentle heat that was comforting in the cool night air. It projected a question that took Ethan by surprise. Why had he helped Ember? Why was he continuing to help all of them, at risk to himself? Ethan considered the question seriously. Because it was the right thing to do, he said finally. Ember was hurt and scared. Anyone would have helped. The leader's mental response was skeptical, sharing impressions of other humans it had observed from a distance during their search for Ember, the fear they showed toward unfamiliar creatures, their tendency to capture or harm what they didn't understand. Not everyone would help, Ethan amended, but some would. We're not all the same. This seemed to intrigue the leader, who projected a series of rapid images, different dragons with varying colors and sizes, yet clearly one people. Humans with different appearances and behaviors, their unity as a species less evident to the alien observer. We're complicated, Ethan admitted. But so are you, I bet. If I visited your world, I'd probably have trouble understanding all the differences in your society too. The concept of Ethan visiting their world caused a ripple of amusement and curiosity among the dragons who were listening to the exchange. Several projected images of what such a visit might entail. Ethan floating through strange landscapes, breathing air that sparkled with energies visible to dragon perception but invisible to human eyes, trying to navigate social customs he couldn't possibly comprehend. Ethan laughed softly. Yeah, I'd be pretty lost, but I'd still like to see it someday. The leader's response was gentle but firm. Their world was unreachable by human technology, separated by barriers of space and dimension that even the dragons could only cross by working together with their unique abilities. Ethan would never be able to visit, just as they would never be able to return to Earth once they left. The finality of this statement sobered Ethan. He looked down at Ember, who had fallen asleep in his lap, scales a peaceful shade of lavender. In 2 more days, he would never see these creatures again. The thought left an unexpected hollow feeling in his chest. "Will I be able to still feel Ember?" he asked, touching his temple to indicate the mental connection. "After you're gone?" The leader considered this, its mental presence thoughtful. The connection between Ethan and Ember was unprecedented in their experience with other species. Typically, non-dragons could not perceive their mental communications at all. That Ethan could not only receive but interpret their thoughts suggested something unique about either human potential or Ethan specifically. The answer, conveyed in impressions rather than a clear yes or no, was uncertain. The connection might fade with distance, or it might persist in some attenuated form. There was no way to know until it happened. Ethan nodded, accepting the uncertainty while privately hoping the connection would remain. The thought of losing this marvel completely was more painful than he wanted to admit. As the night deepened, Ethan reluctantly prepared to leave. The dragons were more active at night, their scales glowing with internal light that they somehow managed to contain within the greenhouse, preventing any telltale illumination from being visible from outside. It was beautiful to watch them move among the plants and vines they had arranged, their forms fluid and graceful. "I'll come back tomorrow," Ethan promised as he gently transferred the sleeping Ember to a nearby nest. Same time. The next day passed in a similar pattern: school, distraction, anticipation for the evening visit. Ethan's parents noticed his preoccupation but attributed it to the fictional science project he had invented. His mother even offered to help him research reptile habitats, an offer Ethan declined as politely as he could while panicking internally. That evening, his father announced plans to clear out the greenhouse that weekend. "It's about time we either fix it up or tear it down," he said over dinner. "Probably tear it down. It would take too much work to restore, and neither of us has the time for gardening." Ethan nearly choked on his spaghetti. "But Dad, I was thinking of using it for experiments." "For school," he added, seeing his father's skeptical look. "What kind of experiments?" Ethan launched into an elaborate explanation of the fictional reptile habitat project, throwing in scientific terms he had Googled during lunch and hoping his father wouldn't notice the inconsistencies. To his surprise and relief, his father seemed intrigued. "That actually sounds pretty educational. Tell you what, let me take a look at the greenhouse first, see what kind of shape it's in. If it's not a total disaster, maybe we can hold off on demolition and shore it up enough for your project." Ethan's stomach dropped. His father wanted to inspect the greenhouse. The greenhouse currently housing 24 alien dragons. "How about Sunday?" Ethan suggested desperately. "After I've had a chance to clean it up a bit first?" His father raised an eyebrow. "Since when are you volunteering for cleanup duty?" "Usually, I have to bribe you to clean your room." "It's for science," Ethan said with what he hoped was a convincing grin. His father laughed. "All right, Sunday it is. But I'm not lifting any heavy debris. That's all you, science guy." As soon as dinner ended, Ethan retreated to his room and reached out mentally to Ember, concentrating on projecting a warning. The mental communication was harder to initiate from his side, but after several minutes of focused effort, he felt Ember's presence respond with alertness. Ethan tried to share images of his father approaching the greenhouse, hoping to convey the danger. Ember's response was immediate, understanding, followed by assurance. The message would be relayed to the others. That night, Ethan snuck out to the greenhouse with a sense of urgency. The dragons were waiting for him, alert and already organized in what he recognized as travel formation. The leader projected calm understanding. They had received Ember's warning and had accelerated their plans. "You're leaving tonight?" Ethan asked, his heart sinking. The leader confirmed. They had absorbed sufficient energy for the journey, though it had required more focused effort than originally planned. They would depart before dawn to minimize the chance of human observation. Ethan looked around at the dragons, their scales glowing with subtle colors in the darkness of the greenhouse. In just 3 days, they had transformed the abandoned structure into a temporary home, working with the materials at hand to create something beautiful and functional. Now they would leave it behind, returning to their distant world with only memories of this brief intersection of their existence with a small corner of Earth. "I wish you could stay longer," Ethan admitted, his voice small in the quiet greenhouse. The leader's response was gentle but firm. Their world called to them. Their proper place in the cosmos lay elsewhere. Earth was a temporary refuge, not a home. But the leader also projected gratitude and respect, not just for the practical help Ethan had provided, but for the lesson his actions had taught them about humanity. In Ethan, they had found evidence that humans were capable of compassion and acceptance beyond their expectations. One by one, the dragons approached Ethan, each briefly touching their crested head to his hand or arm in what he understood to be a gesture of respect and farewell. Their mental presences brushed against his, leaving impressions of gratitude, curiosity, and in some cases, a certain fondness. Ember was the last to approach, the small dragon's colors shifting through a spectrum that reflected complex emotions. Without prompting, Ember projected a series of images. Ethan finding the injured dragon by the creek, carefully treating wounds, sharing food, providing shelter and comfort. Alongside these memories came emotions, fear giving way to trust, pain to healing, loneliness to connection. Tears welled in Ethan's eyes as he knelt to bring himself to Ember's level. "I'm going to miss you," he whispered. Ember pressed its head against Ethan's chest, directly over his heart. The mental connection between them flared, stronger than it had ever been, and Ethan gasped at the intensity of the emotions flowing through it. There was sadness at the parting, yes, but also joy at having met, gratitude for the help received, and something else, a sense of lasting connection that transcended physical proximity. Ember was telling him, in the only way it could, that their bond would not be broken by distance. The leader signaled that it was time. The dragons moved into formation, their scales shifting to the silver white that Ethan had seen in the leader's earlier mental images. Even Ember reluctantly backed away from Ethan to take its place among the younglings at the center of the formation. Ethan stepped outside the greenhouse to give them space, his chest tight with emotion. The night was clear, stars visible despite the ambient light from distant town. A perfect night for a journey home. Inside the greenhouse, the dragons began to glow brighter, their silver-white scales intensifying until they seemed to be made of pure light. The air around them shimmered, distorting like heat waves above hot asphalt. Ethan shielded his eyes as the light grew almost too bright to look at directly. Then came a sound, not heard with his ears but felt in his bones and mind. A harmonious vibration that seemed to resonate with the fabric of reality itself. The air in the center of the dragon formation appeared to fold inward, creating a distortion that expanded into a swirling vortex of light and color unlike anything Ethan had ever seen. Through the mental connection with Ember, which remained strong despite the distance between them, Ethan caught glimpses of what lay beyond that vortex. A world of crystalline spires and aurora-like skies, where beings of light soared through atmospheres rich with energies visible only to dragon perception. It was beautiful and utterly alien, so far removed from Earth that Ethan could barely comprehend it. The dragons moved toward the vortex in formation, the adults guiding the younglings. Ember hesitated, turning back toward Ethan one last time. The mental connection between them pulsed with emotion, gratitude, affection, farewell, but not forever. Ethan raised his hand in a final wave as Ember turned and followed the others into the swirling portal. One by one, the dragons disappeared into the light, until only the leader remained. It turned its crested head toward Ethan and projected a final message, not just gratitude but a promise. Their species would remember this encounter, remember that on a small blue planet on the edge of an unremarkable galaxy, they had found unexpected kindness. And perhaps, someday, their paths would cross again. Then the leader too entered the vortex, which contracted rapidly behind it, folding in upon itself until it vanished with a final pulse of light that momentarily turned night to day before fading to darkness. Ethan stood alone in the yard, staring at the now ordinary greenhouse. Inside, he knew he would find no evidence of the dragon's presence. They were meticulous and considerate guests, and they would have removed all traces of their stay to protect him from questions he couldn't answer. Yet as he turned to walk back to the house, Ethan felt a lingering warmth in his mind. Ember's presence, distant now but still perceptible. The connection remained, stretched thin across whatever cosmic gulf separated them, but unbroken. In his bedroom, Ethan sat by the window, looking up at the stars and wondering which, if any, shone on Ember's world. The mental connection between them had faded to a whisper, but it was there, a reminder that for 3 extraordinary days, humans had not been alone in the universe. Morning arrived with the smell of pancakes and the sound of his mother calling him to breakfast. Ethan descended the stairs, feeling strangely lighter despite the sadness of saying goodbye to Ember. He had been part of something magical, something that few humans would ever experience. At breakfast, his father mentioned the greenhouse inspection plan for Sunday. "I was thinking," Ethan said carefully, "maybe instead of tearing it down, we could rebuild it together? As a father-son project." His father looked surprised but pleased. "That's quite a commitment. What brought this on?" Ethan thought of the dragons, of how they had transformed the abandoned structure into something beautiful and functional in just a few days. "I just think it has potential," he said, "and I'd like to learn how to build things." His father nodded slowly. "All right, we'll take a look on Sunday and come up with a plan." After breakfast, Ethan walked out to the greenhouse alone. As expected, it was empty of any sign that the dragons had ever been there. The vines and plants they had arranged so carefully had been returned to their original state of neglect. The broken glass panels were still broken, though Ethan noticed they had been carefully positioned to minimize the danger of falling shards. Yet the space didn't feel empty to Ethan. It felt full of possibility. This greenhouse had been a temporary haven for visitors from another world. With work and care, it could become something special again, a place of growth and discovery. As Ethan stood in the center of the greenhouse, he felt a flicker in the mental connection he shared with Ember, distant but distinct, like a friend waving from across a vast distance. With it came an impression of curiosity about what Ethan would do with the space now that they were gone. "I'm going to rebuild it," Ethan said aloud, knowing that somehow, across whatever cosmic distance separated them, Ember would understand. "Better than before. And whenever you want to come back, you'll always have a place here." The connection warmed with approval and something like affection before fading back to its now familiar background presence. A constant reminder that Ethan's world had been forever expanded by 3 extraordinary days and a simple act of kindness beside a creek. As he turned to leave the greenhouse, Ethan noticed something small and glittering on the ground where the portal had been. He bent to pick it up. A scale, no larger than a thumbnail, that shifted colors in the morning light from emerald to azure and back again. A small piece of ember, perhaps left deliberately as a keepsake or perhaps shed naturally during their time together. Ethan carefully tucked the scale into his pocket. He would keep it as a reminder, not that he needed one. Some experiences changed a person forever, expanding their understanding of what was possible in the universe. Ethan had helped a lost traveler from another world, and in doing so, had discovered that the capacity for connection transcended differences of species, origin, and even dimension. And perhaps someday, when the stars aligned just right and cosmic paths crossed again, the boy who had saved a baby dragon might look up to find dozens more in his backyard once more, led by one special dragon with scales that shifted from emerald to azure and back again, returning to visit the human friend who had shown them the best of what humanity could be. And that was the end of the story. If you listened all the way to here, don't forget to leave feedback about what you thought of the story in the comments, whether positive or negative. Your feedback helps us improve. Also leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. And I'll leave here on the screen another video that I'm sure you'll like. Big hug, and see you in the next story.